For decades, the Whittaker family lived quietly in the hills of West Virginia, mostly unnoticed by the outside world. Their lives followed a rhythm that didn't change much with time. Same porch, same routines, same familiar faces sitting side by side day after day. They weren't perfect, they weren't polished, but they were together. And for them, that was everything. People who grew up nearby knew the family as a constant presence. You could drive past their place year after year and see the same figures sitting outside, waving or nodding, existing in a way that felt untouched by the rest of the world's urgency. The Whittakers didn't chase trends, success, or attention. They survived. They adapted. They stayed close. When the internet found them, everything shifted. At first, it seemed harmless. Curious viewers watched videos and asked questions. Some laughed. Some felt uncomfortable. Some felt protective. Others felt sympathy. Slowly, attention turned into fascination, and fascination turned into obsession. The family became a subject instead of people. Their lives, once private in their isolation, were suddenly dissected frame by frame. Still, through it all, the family remained together. They sat on the porch. They ate together. They argued, laughed, and relied on one another in the only ways they knew how. Betty kept watch. Larry spoke when needed. BJ moved in and out of trouble, but always came back. Timmy, Ray, and Lorraine existed within the boundaries of the world they understood, supported by familiarity and routine. That was the picture Mark returned to in the spring, years after his first visit had carried their name far beyond Raleigh County. He arrived without ceremony, just a man with a camera and the strange power that camera had created. The dogs remembered him first, crowding around his legs as if time were only a long afternoon between sandwiches. Ray followed behind, moving slower than before, but straighter, his face fuller, his jacket newer, the kind of small armor people wear when they begin to understand that strangers are watching. Mark asked them what had changed since the last time he stood in the living room. The question hung in the air longer than it should have, because change for the Whittakers was not measured in days, but in repairs. Betty answered by pointing to the roof. She remembered the winter when rain came directly through the ceiling and into the frying pan. Now the tin kept the weather outside where it belonged. She tapped the siding with her knuckles and said it looked beautiful. The word beautiful sounded borrowed from Mark, yet she filled it with her own meaning. Beautiful meant warm. Beautiful meant the house would not fall down on Lorraine in her sleep. Kenneth came out from next door and waved. He was one of the brothers the early videos barely mentioned, a man who lived close to the family, but not inside its core. Viewers had built entire theories about him. Where he worked, how much money he kept, whether he cared enough. Mark never asked those things directly, and Betty never volunteered them. In the hills, minding your own business was a form of love. Kenneth showed Mark the trailer he lived in and the car parked outside, and people online later compared the two houses like judges in a contest no one entered. On that day, it was only a neighbor showing his place to a friend. Inside the original home, Mark noticed the cabinets first. Betty wanted him to notice them. She opened and closed the doors so he could hear the solid sound, not like the old plywood that bent when Timmy leaned against it. She said she was proud because she could organize the plates instead of stacking them on the counter. Proud because something new belonged to her and not to the dogs. Mark believed those cabinets were the first gift she ever received that carried her name without conditions. Lorraine touched the countertop as if it were water from the creek, testing whether it was real. She did not talk much, but her hands had learned to speak for her. Mark asked what they would do for dinner. Ray said he had no idea, laughing. In the past, he grabbed bread and sliced meat and made a little sandwich, bologna or whatever, tomatoes, all that. Betty corrected him and said she cooked when her leg allowed it. Kenneth said he was fixing candy and stuff like that. And Mark wondered who actually kept them fed now, that the internet money arrived in waves. Larry stood in the doorway and talked about the truck they messed up on, the new lifeline he hoped Mark would help fix. The truck did not run, yet hope ran fine in that room, bumping against the television voices. Viewers later said Mark's return left everyone in tears, but the tears did not start as sadness. They began as recognition. Mark recognized that the family looked healthier than before. Healthier meant energetic. Healthier meant cleaner glow to themselves. Betty recognized that she could wait for spring instead of fearing winter. Ray recognized that his knee was strong enough to survive another year of walking outside to take a piss when needed, even though he still did not use the bathroom like most people. Mark recognized that Lorraine shared a bed with Betty and that Timmy guarded another bedroom. And he repeated he was being nosy because he understood that curiosity was the engine of every camera. The creek outside carried the old rhythm. It reminded visitors from the south of Tennessee and northwest Georgia, North Carolina, northern Alabama, the kind of landscape people love having a house put on. Kenneth said that was where he lived. Mark said the siding looks beautiful and asked to see Ray's bed in the living room. The dog liked the bed too. The heater burned wood. Mark had bought that chair. He asked what Ray liked to watch on television. Any game, anything. And Ray answered one word at a time the way he always had. What nobody recognized on that first day was how heavy the new rhythm would become. The internet rhythm arrived with YouTube comments, protective and cruel in the same sentence. Why are you taking advantage of these guys? Why is Mark doing this? Mark believed at the end of the day, the Whittakers were better off. He believed attention had improved the quality of their lives a bit. Bit by bit, the house filled with objects that looked like ordinary American life. Cabinets, siding, several cars, a four-wheeler, remote control guarded by Timmy. Those objects created a second family online, a family of strangers who felt sympathy without understanding the rules of the hills. Mark sat beside Betty and asked again what happened next door and who slept in each room. Betty answered patiently. She was proud of the list of repairs and proud of surviving winter. Yet she did not understand that strangers measured love differently. Larry measured love by the truck that needed fixing. Kenneth measured love by stepping in and doing a bit more work. Ray measured love by the living room sofa where he slept all year long. Lorraine measured love by touching the new countertop. Timmy measured love by guarding the remote. Mark measured love by returning with money in his pockets and believing he helped them tremendously. The overarching theme Mark carried back from California was simple. Do not judge the family or judge Mark on what he's doing. He said the Whittakers are just one small piece of the great work he does and that most of his stuff is out in California. Yet the hills of West Virginia were not California. And the blend he put into those videos was unique because the Whittakers had learned to rely on one another without cameras. Mark believed the family were better off after meeting him, and Betty believed the cabinets were the part that mattered most. Ray believed spring was coming. Larry believed Mark and his team were the new lifeline. Lorraine believed the countertop was real. Kenneth believed he could receive a new car without belittling the older vehicles. Timmy believed the remote was a medal. Mark asked the truth to be told, and Timmy laughed. Betty smiled. Perhaps for the first time in her whole life, she was able to smile and say something she received something about her. Mark believed that recognition was the reason to return again and reiterate that this is gift to me. He bought that chair, the heater burned wood, the siding looked beautiful, the roof shone like mirror. The creek reminded visitors from the south of Tennessee and northwest Georgia, North Carolina, northern Alabama. The family watched television whenever they wished, and Mark believed attention had improved their quality of life a bit. What happened this time would later leave everyone in tears because recognition grows heavier when strangers are watching. On that spring day, it was only a man returning to a porch filled with dogs and adults who survived winter. A family who remained together within the boundaries of the world they understood, supported by familiarity and routine, straighter and healthier glow to themselves, proud of cabinets and siding, hopeful about truck that needed fixing, patient with Mark being nosy, laughing about sandwiches and any game on television, waving or nodding the way they always had beyond the hills of West Virginia, where together was everything. The second return always feels different from the first, even if the road is the same. Mark drove up the narrow stretch toward the Whittaker home as though he were tracing his own footsteps laid down years earlier. The mailbox still leaned. The creek still cut through the property like a quiet sentence that never finished, and the dog still announced visitors before any human voice had time to rise. From a distance, the house looked steadier than it once had. The tin roof caught the light, and the siding wrapped the old structure in a skin that made it appear almost ordinary. Ordinary in the way that hides complicated histories behind straight lines. Betty remembered the day Mark first knocked on the door and how she did not want the town to be known. Back then, she feared that strangers would drive past year after year and see the family dissected frame by frame. Now strangers came anyway, guided by fascination that had grown into obsession. Mark believed attention had helped them tremendously, yet he also understood that every gift carried weight. He parked beside the truck that needed fixing, the same truck Larry said they messed up on, and he wondered whether fixing machines was easier than fixing the rhythm of a family. Kenneth walked over from the trailer next door and waved again. He talked more on camera than Lorraine ever had, and viewers later built theories about what some of the brothers did. Mark did not ask Kenneth where he worked or how much money he kept. In the hills, minding your own business was still a form of love, and Kenneth practiced that love by showing his place without belittling the older Nissan exterior parked outside. Mark believed he did amazing work mostly out in California, yet West Virginia demanded different rules than California. The blend Mark put into those videos became unique because the family had learned to rely on familiarity and routine long before cameras. Inside the kitchen, Betty opened and closed the new cabinets so Mark could hear the solid sound again. She was proud of organizing plates instead of stacking them on the counter, proud the way someone counts fingers after winter storms. Mark asked what they would do for dinner, and Ray said he had no idea, laughing about grabbing bread and sliced meat and making a little sandwich, bologna or whatever, tomatoes, all that. Betty corrected him gently and said she cooked when her leg allowed it. Kenneth claimed he was fixing candy and stuff like that. And Mark wondered who actually kept them fed now that internet money arrived in waves like his second family online. Lorraine touched the countertop as if testing whether it was real. She did not talk much, but her hands had learned to speak for her, and Mark believed those hands showed healthier glow to themselves than before. Healthier meant energetic. Healthier meant cleaner jackets and straighter faces. Mark recognized that Ray slept all year long on the living room sofa where the dog liked the bed too. He recognized that the heater burned wood and that he had bought that chair Timmy guarded like a medal beside the remote control. Recognition became the reason Mark returned again and reiterated he helped them tremendously without judging the family or judging Mark on what he was doing. The living room still carried the old rhythm Mark had watched through a screen for years. The television voices filled the house whenever they wished. Any game, anything, and Timmy guarded the remote like proof that boundaries could exist even after the door never locked again. Larry stood in the doorway measuring love by the truck that needed fixing, hoping Mark and his team were the new lifeline. Kenneth measured love by stepping in and doing a bit more work. Ray measured love by surviving winter knee and laughing about sandwiches. Betty measured love by cabinets and siding. Lorraine measured love by touching countertops. Mark measured love by returning with money in his pockets and believing attention improved their quality of life a bit. Yet outside, the world measured differently. You could drive past their place year after year and feel untouched by the rest of the world's urgency. But urgency had finally found the family. YouTube comments arrived protective and cruel in the same sentence. Why are you taking advantage of these guys? Why is Mark doing this? Mark believed at the end of the day the Whittakers were better off after meeting him, and Betty believed the cabinets were the part that mattered most. The creek reminded visitors from the south of Tennessee and northwest Georgia, North Carolina, northern Alabama, the kind of landscape people love having a house put on, and Mark wondered whether love from the internet understood the rules of the hills at all. On that spring day, Mark asked to see Ray's bedroom and peeked into the bed Betty shared with Lorraine. He admitted he was being nosy because curiosity was the engine of every camera. The family answered patiently one word at a time, the way they always had. Patience looked like happiness growing slowly on Betty's face. Maybe for the first time in her whole life, she was able to smile about something about her. Mark recognized that tears viewers spoke of later did not start as sadness, but as recognition becoming heavier when strangers were watching. Kenneth showed Mark the trailer next door again, and Mark compared the two houses only in his mind. The new construction Kenneth lived in looked very nice, and Mark wondered whether core family, Ray, Betty, Lorraine, Timmy, understood the fascination that compared gifts like judges in a contest no one entered. Mark did not want to say cleaner, but they looked more healthy glow to themselves, better glow to themselves than during original video, a couple of videos. Mark believed that was testament to everybody that donated money to the family and that he helped a lot of people through amazing work mostly out in California. The dogs crowded around his legs as though time were only long afternoon between sandwiches. Ray moved slower than before, but straighter, his jacket newer, the kind of small armor people wear when they begin to understand strangers are watching. Larry talked about the truck again, and Mark said, "We can help you with that." Kenneth laughed and said he was fixing candy and stuff like that. Lorraine touched the countertop again. Timmy guarded the remote again. Betty opened the cabinets again. Mark recognized the roof and siding again. Recognition grows heavier each return, and Mark wondered what happened this time would later leave everyone in tears because weight of the internet rhythm never matched the creek rhythm. Mark stepped outside toward the beautiful creek and asked what was going on in the back. In the creek, show me, take me. The creek carried the old beat that reminded visitors from the south of Tennessee and northwest Georgia, North Carolina, northern Alabama, and Mark believed anybody from the south would love this little creek. Kenneth said that was where he lived, and Mark said the siding looks beautiful. Betty smiled. Ray laughed. Larry hoped. Timmy guarded. Lorraine touched. Mark recognized. The evenings softened the mud around the house, and Mark perhaps did not want the town to be known because the family were becoming more famous. But fame arrived anyway with strangers who drove guided by fascination. Mark believed attention improved the quality of their life a bit. The family remained together through it all within the boundaries of the world they understood, supported by familiarity and routine, healthier glow to themselves, patient with Mark being nosy, hopeful about truck that needed fixing, proud of cabinets and siding, laughing about sandwiches and any game on television beyond the hills of West Virginia, where together was everything. When Mark finally turned the camera off for a moment, he admitted privately that curiosity could become a form of responsibility. Responsibility meant returning again and again without judging the family and not judging Mark on what he was doing. Betty spoke about the list of repairs like a mother counting fingers after child falls, making sure nothing missing. Ray survived winter knee. Larry measured love by the truck. Kenneth practiced love by minding his own business. Lorraine let her hands speak. Timmy guarded boundaries. Mark believed they were better off at the end of the day. But what happened this time would not stay inside the cabinets or inside the trailer next door. The internet rhythm waited outside like YouTube comments that dissected their life frame by frame. Mark wondered whether extraordinary American life could grow from ordinary objects alone. Ordinary objects had created a second family online, a family of strangers who felt sympathy without understanding the rules of the hills. Every return opened a door that never locked again, and Mark believed at the end of the day the Whittakers were better off after meeting him. Betty believed the cabinets were the part that mattered most. Ray believed spring was coming. Larry believed Mark and his team were the new lifeline. Lorraine believed the countertop was real. Kenneth believed he could wave without belittling the older vehicles. Timmy believed the remote was a medal. Mark believed attention had helped tremendously. The tears viewers spoke of later would come from the gap between two rhythms. The creek rhythm that never changed much with time, and the internet rhythm that changed everything shifted. Mark drove, guided by fascination back from California to West Virginia, where the family had learned to rely on one another without cameras long before YouTube comments arrived, protective and cruel in the same sentence. The family remained together through it all, supported by familiarity and routine beyond the hills of West Virginia, where together was everything, healthier and straighter glow to themselves, proud of cabinets and siding, hopeful about truck that needed fixing, patient with Mark being nosy. We can agree that attention can be both a gift and a responsibility. If this story moves you, let it move you toward kindness instead of judgment, toward seeing the Whittaker family as people again instead of a subject, and toward remembering that real tears deserve real compassion. Mark went back to the porch the way someone returns to a memory that has started breathing on its own. The hills around the property held the sound of early evening, dogs settling into the dust, the creek repeating the same quiet line it had carried for generations. Ray sat outside with that newer jacket zipped to his chin, even though the air was not cold. Betty said spring was coming, and she could not wait. Waiting had become a different verb for them since the internet rhythm arrived. Before, they waited only for weather and checks in the mailbox. Now they waited for Mark, for viewers, for the next theory written in a comment they would never read. Kenneth talked about building a house next door and how the road made a lot of sense when families live side by side. Larry stood near the messed-up truck again, hoping Mark and his team could help him get fixed. Lorraine did not talk much. She let her hands rest on the rail of the porch, as if the siding were still new water to be tested. Timmy guarded the remote inside like proof that boundaries could survive fame. Mark admitted he was being nosy because curiosity was the engine of every camera. Yet he also understood that engines sometimes pull more than they can carry. Inside the living room, Mark asked to see Ray's bed again. The dog liked the bed too. The heater burned wood. Mark had bought that chair. He believed attention improved their quality of life a bit. And compared to the first visit, it was true. Healthier glow to themselves. More energetic. Straighter faces. Betty opened and closed the cabinets so Mark could hear the solid sound again, and said she was proud. Maybe for the first time in her whole life, she had something about her. Ray laughed about sandwiches, bologna or whatever, tomatoes, all that, and said he had no idea what dinner would be. Kenneth said he was fixing candy and stuff like that. And Mark wondered who actually kept them fed now that money arrived in waves like a second family online. Mark stepped outside toward the beautiful creek and said anybody from the South would love this little creek that reminded visitors of Tennessee and Northwest Georgia, North Carolina, Northern Alabama. The creek rhythm never changed much with time, but the internet rhythm changed. Everything shifted. You could drive past their place year after year and feel untouched by the rest of the world's urgency. Yet urgency had finally learned their names. YouTube comments arrived protective and cruel in the same sentence, asking why Mark would do this or why people would bring attention to them. Mark believed at the end of the day, the Whittaker family were better off after meeting him, and Betty believed the cabinets were the part that mattered most. What happened this time did not start as sadness, but as recognition. Mark recognized that the family remained together through arguing and laughing and relying on one another in the only ways they knew how. Betty recognized she survived winter without fearing rain coming directly through the ceiling. Ray recognized his knee was strong enough to survive another year of walking outside to take a piss when needed. Lorraine recognized the countertop was real. Larry recognized hope ran fine even though the truck did not. Kenneth recognized that minding your own business was still a form of love. Timmy recognized boundaries could be guarded with a remote control medal. Mark recognized that curiosity could become a form of responsibility. Responsibility meant returning again and again without judging the family and not judging Mark on what he was doing. The gap between two rhythms grew wider each visit. Viewers measured love differently than the Hills had taught. They compared gifts like judges in contests. No one entered, dissected their life frame by frame, and sometimes forgot that a family sitting on a porch were adapting the best they could. Mark believed attention improved their lives a bit, yet he also wondered whether extraordinary American life could grow from ordinary objects alone. Roof, siding, cabinets, floor, several cars, a four-wheeler, Cherry bought. Betty counted the list of repairs like mother counting fingers after child falls, making sure nothing missing. Ray laughed. Lorraine touched. Larry hoped. Kenneth waved. Timmy guarded. Mark recognized. The evening softened again, and Mark turned the camera off for a moment, feeling that engines of the internet were waiting outside, heavier than recognition inside. Tears viewers spoke of later would come from that weight, not matching the creek rhythm that never changed much with time. Mark drove, guided by fascination, back from California to West Virginia, where the family had learned to rely on one another without cameras long before YouTube comments arrived, protective and cruel in the same sentence. The family remained together through it all, supported by familiarity and routine beyond the hills of West Virginia, where together was everything, healthier and straighter glow to themselves, proud of cabinets, and siding hopeful about truck that needed fixing, patient with Mark being nosy, laughing about sandwiches and any game on television. Comment below. If you watch this story, remember to see the Whittaker family as people again. Real tears deserve real compassion, and kindness matters more than judgment in any rhythm that finds its way to their porch. The visit that followed was the one people would later talk about in lowered voices. Mark had returned many times, but on this day, the family understood something unspoken was being carried toward them along with the usual bags and greetings. The porch looked steadier in the spring light. Yet steadiness can be fragile when it is built partly from the hopes of strangers. Ray sat in the familiar chair, the chair Mark once bought, and he rocked forward with the careful motion of a man learning his own strength. Betty watched the dogs circle Kenneth's legs and Larry's boots, and she counted the family with her eyes the way she used to count the repairs. Roof, siding, cabinets, floor. Counting had become her language for keeping the world in order. Mark asked again how they had been, and the answers came in fragments just like before, but the fragments sounded warmer. Kenneth said he was staying next door. Larry said the truck still needed fixing. Lorraine smiled without much talking. Timmy guarded the remote inside while the television filled the room with any game, anything. Mark believed attention improved their quality of life a bit. Yet he also felt the bit growing heavier in his pockets. He wondered privately whether returning with money was enough to protect the rhythm that had kept them together for decades. The hills around the house carried the sound of early evening, and the creak repeated its old, quiet line. Mark stepped toward the back again, asking to be shown the beautiful creek, the landscape that reminded visitors from the south of Tennessee and northwest Georgia, North Carolina, northern Alabama. Anybody from the south would love having a house put on this little creek, he said, and Betty agreed by tapping the siding with her knuckles, as if beautiful meant warm, meant safe, meant the house would not fall down on Lorraine in her sleep. Lorraine followed behind, touching the rail of the porch, letting her hands speak for her the way they always had. What happened this time did not start as sadness, but as recognition becoming louder than machines. Mark recognized that Ray still slept on the living room sofa all year long, and that the dog liked the bed too. He recognized that Betty was proud. Maybe for the first time in her whole life, she received something about her in those cabinets. He recognized that Larry seemed much more involved in the family and supported the core family a lot. He recognized that Kenneth practiced love by minding his own business without belittling the older vehicles parked outside. Recognition grows heavier each visit, and Mark felt that weight not matching the creek rhythm that never changed much with time. Viewers outside did not see the weight immediately. You could drive past their place year after year and feel untouched by the rest of the world's urgency. Yet urgency had finally learned their names through YouTube comments protective and cruel in the same sentence, asking why Mark would do this or why people would bring attention to them. Mark believed at the end of the day, the Whittaker family were better off after meeting him, and Betty believed the cabinets were the part that mattered most. But belief from the internet sometimes forgets that real people do not live inside lists or theories. They live inside fragments of talking, fragments of smiling, fragments of surviving winter knees and sandwiches, bologna or whatever, tomatoes, all that. Mark turned the camera off for a moment and took a step back again, reiterating in his own mind that this was video production by Mark Laita, mostly out in California. Yet California could not teach the rules of the hills. The family had learned to rely on one another, without cameras long before the door, never locked again after the first visit. Returning again and again had become Mark's form of responsibility. Responsibility meant not judging the family and not judging Mark on what he was doing. Betty measured responsibility by counting fingers after child falls, making sure nothing missing. Ray measured responsibility by surviving spring coming. Larry measured responsibility by hoping machines could be fixed. Kenneth measured responsibility by waving from next door. Lorraine measured responsibility by touching countertops. Timmy measured responsibility by guarding boundaries with a remote control medal. Mark measured responsibility by believing attention helped tremendously. The evenings softened the mud around the house again, and the porch filled with dogs settling into dust. Ray asked what they would do for dinner tonight, and said he had no idea. Betty said she cooked when her leg allowed it. Kenneth said he was fixing candy and stuff like that, laughing. Larry hoped Mark and his team were the new lifeline. Lorraine did not talk much, but she followed along. Timmy guarded the remote inside. Mark believed they looked healthier glow to themselves, straighter faces, better glow to themselves. Recognition became louder than sadness, and that loudness would later leave everyone in tears because gap between two rhythms grew wider. The internet rhythm waiting outside, and the creek rhythm that never changed much with time. Mark sat beside Betty and asked the truth to be told, and Timmy laughed inside. Mark believed attention improved their quality of life a bit, yet he also wondered whether extraordinary American life could grow from ordinary objects alone. Roof shining like mirror, siding beautiful, cabinets proud, floor straight, several cars, four-wheeler, chair he bought, sofa Ray slept all year long. Betty counted the list again like mother counting fingers. Ray laughed again about sandwiches. Larry hoped again about truck. Kenneth waved again from trailer next door. Lorraine touched again the countertop. Timmy guarded again the remote. Mark recognized again the weight growing heavier in his pockets. The family remained together through it all, supported by familiarity and routine beyond the hills of West Virginia, where together was everything. And Mark believed at the end of the day, they were better off after meeting him. But recognition carries responsibility, and responsibility must learn to follow the quieter beat of the creek instead of the louder beat of strangers. They walked with Mark to the edge of the yard as the dogs followed the familiar path. The roof, the siding, the cabinets. Each repair proved that something had changed, yet the creek kept the same patient beat it always had. Ray waved. Betty counted faces with her eyes. Lorraine touched the rail and smiled without much talking. Larry hoped the truck would finally run. Kenneth stood next door, minding his own business the way the hills taught him. When the camera left, recognition stayed behind, heavier than any gift. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.